Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. 2 days ago on Dialogue, we covered the case of a New York City police officer who was convicted of manslaughter for fatally shooting an unarmed black man in a darkened stairwell. Peter Liang could face up to 15 years in prison for killing Akhil Gurley when he is sentenced in a couple of months' time. Advocates for police accountability have closely watched the case because U.S. police officers who injure or kill civilians rarely face criminal charges. But Peter Liang is a Chinese American, and many are complaining that he's been made a scapegoat because of his ethnicity. So today we will examine the level of racism within the American police and judicial systems, and we will be asking if recent cases such as this latest one are accelerating inevitable change in this regard. I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Lawrence Bram, foreign policy advisor to the U.S. Green Party in the 2016 presidential race, and John Chen, an intercultural filmmaker and specialist. But first, let's remind ourselves about this special case with this background report.
Across America, major cities like New York, Washington, Chicago and Los Angeles have seen massive turnouts from local Chinese communities. Tens of thousands of people have come out to protest against the conviction of former NYPD officer Peter Liang.
What do you want? Justice! When do you want it? Now! Justice for Peter Liang! Justice for Peter Liang!
I think what we need to be here today is to show that Chinese Americans care about equal justice. We're here to let people know that the death of Akhil Gurley is a tragedy, but this tragedy has been compounded by the injustice to Peter Liang.
I'm a retired homicide detective. I was the chief of police. It's obvious to all of us in law enforcement that this is a tragic accident. That's all it is. Nobody wanted to see Mr. Gurley shot and passing away. You know, it was just a tragic accident. It should not be a crime.
Demonstrators say Peter Liang was used as a scapegoat at a time of great pressure to prosecute police officers involved in the deaths of unarmed black men and boys.
He was singled out to be prosecuted for the accident.
I'm here today because this is about equality of protection for all people, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender or where they're from. There shouldn't be two standards, one for some people and one for other people.
Liang's trial garnered attention because the policeman was Chinese American, and most cases of police shootings against black people have involved white officers. Protesters hope their voices will be loud enough to make a difference ahead of Peter Liang's sentencing on April 14th. He faces up to 15 years in prison.
Well, welcome to our dialogue here, John and Lawrence. Do you think this is, first of all, a crime, or it's simply just a tragic accident? John?
Well, first of all, I think it is a defining moment in history, in Asian American or Chinese American history in particular. In terms of talking about crime, I think I will probably leave it to the legal professional to define. I think we need to investigate the facts from more complex layers versus just being too emotional about it.
The precaution is appreciated, of course, here. Lawrence, what's your take?
As a lawyer, first of all, he shot what could be determined as a warning shot. It hit the wall, and then after hitting the wall, hit the victim. You have situations where white American police have shot African Americans right in the head, publicly on video, or strangled them, and the case is dismissed. It's not even, in many cases, not even brought to trial. In this case, Peter Liang was dismissed by the police department immediately and then tried. And then he's convicted. There's no question that this is a racially biased case. And in fact, what's happening is they're sowing the seeds of confrontation between ethnic groups within America.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit why this is an issue of victimhood? Peter Liang, the police officer from New York City Police Department, was singled out as a scapegoat at a poor moment when most of the white police officers were not charged after they shot and killed unarmed Africans.
I wonder whether we need to make such a comparison between what happened in the past and with today, although it is totally relevant. I think if in the past, if something has been done in a wrongful way, that doesn't mean we cannot correct it today. So we cannot ask for equality on the base of comparing with the past. I think we really need to investigate what's really happening with the case, really, I mean, religiously.
Yes, religiously, the court and the jury should first of all look at the evidence very carefully. But Lawrence said clearly that Peter Liang shot the war and the bullet was deflected by the war. It killed. The bullet was sent into the chest of Gurley by accident.
Manslaughter, that is an accidental killing. It is not a deliberate, intentional killing. And you have so many cases where white American police have intentionally killed African Americans without any punishment at all. We have to ask the case, why is this Asian American being singled out? And we have to raise the question, as so many Asian Americans are raising right now across the streets of America, that this is actually a racially prejudiced outcome. And in many ways, what's happening now is he's become a sacrificial victim for, to say, to reverse the past, to cover the faults of what's basically a very racially based system. First of all, the white American police have the best defense that their associations and unions call. But nobody came to his defense. They were using a normal defense attorney. And we all know the American justice system is about money. You have the best attorneys, you can buy your way out. And that's why so many African Americans are behind bars, because it's about not just race, it's also about income and class. And what's happening now is you have the emergence not of a class society, but of a caste society.
Well, America is known, I mean, the United States of America is known for gun-related violence. Bearing firearms is protected by Second Amendment. Therefore, in most cases, according to one of the first few rules of the Code of Conduct for police officers in the United States, white or black, is to go home at the end of your shift and to survive very dangerous situations such as those African Americans who do bear firearms, and the lives of police officers are really in constant danger. Therefore, the acquittal of most of the police officers, and they were released, they were declared innocent.
You know, it's not just African Americans who bear arms. If you look at these school shootings, most of these school shootings that have occurred over the past several years have not been African Americans, they've been white Americans. And so American human rights is everybody has the right to have a gun and to use it. But this is not human rights. This is violation of innocent people's livelihood. And of course, police are trained, but let's look at the cause of it. You have blighted neighborhoods. I've been working in the Green Party campaign. I've been in cities like Baltimore, totally wiped out, blighted cities. And what's happening is it's because of the failure of the economic policies to address these issues, and it's particularly hurting minority communities, African American communities. Once somebody, as a child, a teenager, has no opportunity to education or jobs, they go out in the street, they're dealing with drugs, they're dealing with guns, they get arrested as a teenager, that's on their record for the rest of their life. They can't get a decent job, and they are in a situation of perpetual poverty, cyclical restraint. It is really a system that is quickly becoming a caste system as opposed to a class system. We think about the American dream and upward mobility of income. That doesn't exist for most of the minority groups in the country because of the economic disempowerment. You now have the elimination of the middle class. You have the elimination of the opportunity for people to rise up. And so you have what keeps that caste system in place? A police force, which is very much also racially driven.
You put your finger on a very controversial point of view, namely the what you describe a class society in the United States. Now, there is one account that says clearly, Joe, class struggle, which might be used in a country like Russia and China to overthrow a anti-revolutionary government like the KMT before 1949. However, class struggle may have been dissolved and classes may have been disarmed by the bipartisan political institutions through parliamentary debates, check and balance, supervisory role of the media, which acts independently. Class struggles have actually been dissolved, laying groundwork for rule of law. Now, don't you think this spirit of parliamentary politics is being eroded ruthlessly, and the abusive use of law enforcement by the whites is exactly playing this role to dissolve the spirit of rule of law?
Well, I'm trying to think America as a melting pot, which suppose you have get rid of the class and get rid of the issue of a color issue of you come from different backgrounds. This is a place where you can actually assimilate into a different races. This is a place where you can reach your American dream, which represent upward mobility, right? I think if we can come back to the case of Peter Liang, I was wondering, if I may say, about his inaction of dealing with saving the individual. I was just trying to understand why he was unable to do so. And if we can address that, we can,
Did you ever study very carefully his inexperience, his young age, given the poor training of only perhaps 18 months? I forget the precise duration of his training, but obviously he was caught unprepared. So the training itself deserves blame. Why don't you go back to the police department of New York City, asking for their explanation and clarification of this case?
So we need to evaluate this particular case from multiple perspectives. Maybe the NYPD is partially to blame, sending such an inexperienced
Another
person.
guy from...
But life is not a rehearsal. You cannot have a second chance. So once you're in position, you have to, go along with the protocol for police.
You have a situation now where America is not in the direction anymore of being a melting pot. You have a lot of racial divisiveness.
Exactly, that's my next follow-up question, Lawrence. What's happened is Donald Trump is taking advantage of the issue of hate and anger, right? If not fears, to call for rejection of immigration, particularly those from Mexico. Don't you think he's calling for class struggle?
Well, there are two issues. One is class struggle and the other is apartheid. And what Donald Trump is talking about in generating racial hatred across America is actually, and talking about walls to divide and to keep people out. This is the introduction or the beginning of an apartheid system. And it is this direction that he's moving in that is so incredibly dangerous, but he's getting support. And that underscores the racial divisiveness. And why is that happening? It's happening because of the failure of the economic policies over 2 presidential administrations, the elimination of the middle class. You talk about class struggle. You don't have class struggle if you have a wide middle class.
Maybe this is more of an issue about ethnicity. Now, since 9/11, people have been asking almost the same question as to what went wrong with civil liberty. Civil liberty as a movement shocked and impressed the whole world when Martin Luther King, the Reverend, presented the American dream. And that was a classical case to highlight the importance of putting an end to racial discrimination in the United States, which is regarded far and wide as the flagship democracy for the rest of the world. Now, after 9/11, Muslims have been obsessively governed by fears because many whites have been talking about Islamic extremism. Secondly, African Americans have developed a fear about being mistreated by white police officer. This time around, Peter Liang highlighted the fear of ethnic Chinese. So what went wrong? What is going wrong with the ethnic policy? Melting pot is something that is highlighted by the Statue of Liberty, right? In New York.
It's in New York.
Now, it seems this giant is collapsing. Is on the verge of disintegration. If you look at dangers looming larger, so large.
It's not only Donald Trump, it would also be Hillary Clinton. You have in what we call the duopoly or the one party with two-faced system. You have the movement now toward further elimination of the middle class. As I was explaining before, many people in the poverty or in the lower class pockets can't get out. They can't get out, and then they become basically incarcerated. We've got more people in prisons than any other country, and we're building more prisons to incarcerate more people, and these are all people at the lowest income levels. Most of them are African American. Next group is Hispanic American. Why? We have to ask this question. At the same time, white Americans are afraid. They're afraid of losing their jobs. Why? Because job security is not there. Of some of the 80% of jobs that have been created by the Obama administration, most of those jobs, at 80%, are actually only part-time jobs. They do not have any social security, any support that's being given to them. And there's no security out there. I was just in Washington State, in Seattle. We have now in Seattle 20% increase in street people per annum. This is shocking. You're in San Francisco, the head of the tech centers. You know, you've got more street people on the street outside of Twitter headquarters than you do in New Delhi. But now the point is, it's coming down to class, and it's a class. It is effectively a racial issue. People are being laid off. They're being economically disempowered, and that's why there's violence in the street.
The Chinese-American issue is somewhat different.
It's not different. It's time for the Chinese Americans to step out into the street and to also stand up for themselves. And that's why when you said it's a historic moment, I agree with that. Because previously, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in general, have been, you know, we have to take care of ourselves, we just do business, we don't become politicized. But it's the failure of the political system and the economic system that is forcing every ethnic group to actually come together and to stand up for their rights. And it's not only ethnic, racial, it's also about income, and it's about regions. And people have to stand up because the federal government is failing. It is dysfunctional.
Look, Lawrence, one of the first shows that I did ever since I took over Dialogue, which was then called Sunday Topics, was racial discrimination against Chinese American. You know, Wenho Lee, the espionage saga, he was released, and the Chief Justice apologized to the Chinese American community. Ever since then, nothing seems to have changed. Everything remains the same about the fate of Chinese American. But you're watching Dialogue with Jung Cheng and Lawrence Bram. We've been discussing whether Peter Liang, a police officer from New York, should be sentenced up to 15 years imprisonment simply for an alleged accidental killing of an African American, whether he's a scapegoat of the tensions between white officers and African Americans. Many of them were killed, and yet police officers were released. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us. Welcome back. We were talking about why Wenho Lee was released due to kind of racial discrimination that was implied in some of the law enforcement behavior in the United States. The Chief of Justice apologized, but nothing has changed fundamentally, partly because, as I interviewed Lily Lee Chen, a former mayor of one of the small cities in Los Angeles, she said, in fact, were we able to get united the way African Americans did in the Congress to deliver their strong voice, Mr. Wenho Lee would not have been charged wrongly. So what do you think of her complaints and her appeal for greater unity among the Chinese Americans?
Well, this pivotal moment that representing a cornerstone in Asian American history finally arrived as of like a few days ago. But I think the journey is so long. But I wonder what is exactly that the Chinese community is asking. Of course, you're always saying, I want equality, I want justice for all. But what exactly are you asking in relation to this case? Are you asking for a lighter verdict, or are you asking to set him free? What exactly are you asking? Because we really need to study the case a little bit further. I just always wondered if someone is taking this opportunity to ask for something that they should be, I mean, if you ask something from somebody else, you should respect others. Equality or justice for all, including the equality for the black people. I think Kai Gurley is an important man. Is a man who was being killed, and that concern needs to be addressed too. And I don't want to see the Chinese community only marching for their own rights, forgetting about the rights for other people.
One of the slogans that impressed the world was not about the case itself, but about the equal justice. Black lives matter. Asian American lives also matter. That's perhaps the core issue for this campaign that prompted people in their thousands to take to the street in protest against the alleged discrimination against Peter Liang. Now, African Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed by white police officer, and African Americans, unarmed African Americans are more likely to be killed than unarmed white Americans. So here is the issue of racial discrimination. Why there's always this glass ceiling regarding ethnicity in the United States, which is a democracy?
Well, again, a lot of it's a carryover from a movement which has never
Before you
been
give us your answer,
resolved.
your version of the answer, Lawrence and John, I remember one of the first things President Obama did after taking office in the first term was to visit a local African American community. What he said was very impressive. He said, most of you here are parents and you have your kids. Now, the message I want to deliver to you is that don't always encourage your children to draw inspirations from role models like Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson. You should send your children to good universities, good colleges, to be a lawyer, to be a politician, to be a writer, to be a good journalist, instead of just, acting like a pop star, Michael Jackson, also Michael Jordan, superstar for basketball industry. Now, what do you think of the deep implications that President Obama implied in this speech to the local African American community?
President Obama has made a lot of speeches, but he's done very little to actually stand up for all the African Americans who've been killed by police brutality. And I think
he did show his anger. He did show his anger when Michael Brown was killed.
Many people are in the community, and I've been working with them, are quite frustrated. And I think he's very much hamstrung, and he's not reached out. I think what's happening that I see coming out of this particular case, which is very interesting, is the amount of African Americans who are marching with the Chinese Americans and who are saying that you have to stand up, you have to act together, and you have to speak out. And you talked about the case of Wen Ho Lee. And I remember this case. This was very politicized. It was a political case to put pressure on China by putting pressure on the Chinese American community. And as soon as Clinton was about to get out of office, the case was dismissed, just like that. So we have to ask a question: why is a Chinese American being singled out for all of the killings of African Americans by white police, and he is taking the blame, and he's the scapegoat? Is it because the authorities do not feel that the Chinese American community will stand up for him? Is that why? Or is it because they're taking advantage of all of the anti-China fears that are being drummed up in this election year by both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? Are they taking advantage of that emotion right now to think that, okay, in this case, we can offer a police officer to the African American community and no one will care because they're Chinese?
Points well taken. Points well taken.
The African Americans have stood up together with the Chinese Americans, and that is what counts. And I think that is really the pushback.
Now,
I think the jury is probably not thinking along that line. I think they're probably just doing...
Jury takes instructions from the judge. In almost all cases, the judge tells the jury exactly what are the points that they can consider. And it's very much determined by the judge's instructions. And I know that as a lawyer. And so you have to look at this case. What is being driven here? Why is this case been so exceptional? You know, again, this is not a direct killing. It's not an intentional killing. And so because of this, we have to ask more questions. And for the first time, Chinese Americans are coming out on the street. They have been the backbone of so much of America. They build our railroads, and frankly, they're building our IT industry. And so they deserve to have a right and a voice. And I'm very proud of them for going out and making that voice and becoming very politicized. It's about time.
Right. I have a question on manslaughter. If you think this is wrongly persecuted, then what's the definition of manslaughter? He's being charged with
Unintentional killing. If someone has no
second degree
intention,
manslaughter is what?
if someone's hit in the street by a car,
Yeah.
that's manslaughter. It's unintentional killing, as opposed to an intentional killing where someone says, I'm going to kill you, and they run you down, or they have anger and intend to kill you. So
Well,
unintentional killing is manslaughter.
I'm not
let's put
exactly
aside the issue
convinced
of
that he's
unintentional
singled
killing.
out.
We can argue.
The issue is,
endlessly.
was
We
there
can
intention or
argue
not?
for hours, Lawrence. We can argue for hours about whether it's accidental killing or a crime. But let's look at the issue of ethnicity. Now, the whole world is impressed by the glow of image like Colin Powell, Susan Rice, Alexander Haig, former Secretary of Defense of the Reagan administration. Now you can come up with a long list of those very brilliant, successful African Americans, but only a few Chinese Americans in the cabinet. We have Elaine Chao, former Secretary of Labor, but I hate to mention that she married a party whip in the Congress, a very powerful guy.
We have a few with I.M. Pei,
But
we
she's
have
also
David
brilliant.
Hall, we
She's
have
capable,
Connie
of course.
Chung, we
Yeah,
have
Gary
Martin
Locke,
Yan,
yeah.
with all
But-
these beautiful, successful Asian
but still the
Americans.
voice of African, still the voice of Chinese American is viewed as weak. Therefore, what's wrong with the readiness and the will, if any, of Chinese Americans in North America to get involved in politics? It seems most of them would have their children to be educated about accounting, financing, legal studies.
That's changing.
engineering.
That's
Yeah, that
changing
is
with
changing.
this
Is it changing?
case. It's changing with this case. And it's also changing with more and more Asian Americans
Change
being
is
involved
fine,
in
but is it a
politics.
lot easier for graduates to find jobs? I mean, this is a practical concern.
According to the census of 2010, we have 34,000 NYPD officers. 4,000 are Asian Americans, about 1,500 are Chinese Americans. This shows that Chinese are not just accountants or not just doctors or a businessman. They are entering a new direction. Being police is very heroic, and you protect the city, and it is changing the landscape of Chinese American life, or is changing. And I don't see
Another
I mean,
perspective,
a lot of discrimination. I mean, when we call someone discriminate you, you have to really offer facts. You cannot suffer inferiority complex, then call other discriminate you. I have lived in the United States for 28 years. I have never felt discriminated. Maybe I'm very lucky woman doing whatever I am doing, but I just feel that we cannot blame others when you yourself are not confident enough, especially when we evaluate the case like this. We cannot just say, well, it's wrong just because the previous case was such, therefore my case should match the others. This is too emotional. I think we need to be rationally, validate this case and to present a better image of
Joan,
Chinese American.
I have a suggestion. I should bring you back for another discussion about the same issue, but today time is running out. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.